everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. My name is Kyle Buller. I'm your host for today. And today on the show, we are joined by Dr. Jerry Brown. Dr. Jerry Brown is an anthropologist, ethnomycologist, and award-winning educator. He's the founding professor of anthropology at the Florida International University in Miami, where he teaches a course on psychedelics and culture. And he's also the co-author, along with his wife, Julie Brown, The Psychedelic Gospels, The Secret History of Hallucinogens in Christianity, and a few others. So welcome to the show, Jerry. I know this is your second time on the show, and I believe we also have a blog with you and Julie exploring mystical experiences. And I'm excited to just dig in today. We're going to talk about psychedelics, past, present, and future, why it's important to kind of understand the past and where we're coming from, and also how that's important for clinicians and therapists why we need to know some of these things. So welcome. If you want to fill in any gaps that I missed out with your introduction, feel free to do so.
No, absolutely. It's a pleasure, Kyle, always to be here with the Psychedelics Today team. I think I started teaching on psychedelics and culture back in 1975 after a first rather frightening LSD experience in 1973. And as an anthropologist, I wanted to learn a lot more about these powerful substances. And as they say, if you want to learn something, teach about it. So I designed and put this course in the catalog, which Thomas Roberts tells me is the first college-listed course on psychedelics in the U.S., possibly in the world. For today, what I'd like to explore... I'm sorry?
I said amazing. That's wonderful.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, who knew? And so what is amazing is really to look at this decades later and see how beyond Julie, my wife and co-author, and imagination, how far psychedelics have come moving into the mainstream. So today, I'd like to talk about what we're going to do in this course on psychedelics past, present, and future. And it's really going to be an overview, so to speak. We're going to look at the past. We're going to look at 10 landmarks in psychedelic history. We're going to look at the role of psychedelics and shamanism in world religion. We're going to move into the present, and we're going to talk about inner journeys, using psychedelics for passion and purpose. We'll talk about the founding of the psychedelic renaissance by Roland Griffiths and his colleagues at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And then we're going to move into the future and some of the challenging issues that come up when we look at psychedelics, law, and public policy. And as we explore the commercialization and the tensions that have grown between the utopian visionary psychedelic founders and the public companies that are trying to proprietize and patent some of the psychedelic techniques, both the manufacture of psychedelics and the actual delivery of psychedelic services. And then I guess we could say, due to Michael Pollan's tremendously successful book on how to change your mind, psychedelics, he's been one of the most effective advocates in moving psychedelics into the media mainstream and in popularizing it and shifting public opinion on it. Many others have, but his book has certainly been a landmark. We're going to look at the huge number of career opportunities that are opening up in the field from public companies, private companies, nonprofit education. So it's a great opportunity. And I think what happens here is that it gives therapists and clinicians and people who are looking to work in the field of psychedelic psychotherapy a grounding in the history of this field and shamanism, which goes back time immemorial, are the first psychotherapists, so to speak. And you'll also get a sense of what the science is and the cross-cultural foundations underpinning psychedelic psychotherapy today. So I think this is very important, and it's also important for people to be able to apply these to potential career opportunities and to understand sort of the ecology of the field and how it's evolving today. And if you're open to it, I'd kind of like to run through some of the main themes and do a little bit of a dive into a few aspects of the past, present, and the future. How does that sound to you, Kyle?
Let's do it. Let's dig in. Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
important, to really kind of know where we're coming from. So, hopefully it gives us some sort of direction of where we're going. I always kind of come back to that saying. I forget where I've heard it. It's like, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like really honoring those who came before us. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we're both honoring those who became before us, and also given, it's kind of, look, imagine you were around when the telescope was invented in the 17th century, or the microscope was invented, and then how much time it took to get to the Hubble telescope that's opened up the cosmos to us, and how much time it took to get from the original microscope to the electron microscope that could actually allow us to image and see the activity of individual viruses, which allow us to develop vaccines today. Well, we're sort of like with the invention of the mind scope. And that's what psychedelics are. They reveal the mind, they reveal the neurochemistry, they reveal the chambers of the mind that open up. They've been called both the royal road to the unconscious and the superhighway to the unconscious. And we are standing on the shoulders of giants, and we're going to talk about a number of them in this course. But we're also like the medieval cathedral builders. We are now today laying the foundations of a great edifice of maybe a psychedelic reformation, whose shape we may not live to see the contours that it's going to take. Because the cathedral builders, they laid the foundations, but these churches or cathedrals took maybe 200 years to build. So they never saw where it was going. And let's jump right in and talk about one of the great foundations and an essential landmark in the history of psychedelics and culture. I think many people know that Albert Hofmann first discovered LSD at Sandoz Laboratories in Basel, Switzerland in 1938. But he didn't realize LSD's power and psychedelic properties until Bicycle Day in April 19th, 1943, when he accidentally got a very small amount on his finger and became disoriented and rode his bicycle home and had that frightening, am I dying experience that led him to realize that this was powerful at a millionth of a gram. And Sandoz was astonished by this because none of the psychedelics they've been working with were powerful beyond a thousandth of a gram, lower than a thousandth of a gram. But I want to talk about Stanislav Grof, who is one of the true giants in this field, who has done 60 years of research, starting out in 1954, when Hofmann's Sandoz lab sent out samples of LSD to psychiatrists around the world to have them explore what its potential might be. And ironically, Grof at that time was training to be a Freudian psychotherapist. And he was working in a program, and the director of that program said that anyone who's going to try this LSD, he was very interested in strobe light effects. So believe it or not, about the third or fourth hour into Stanislav Grof's very first LSD session, they turned on these powerful strobe lights off and on. And as Grof describes in his book, The Holotropic Mind, he was catapulted out of his body. He moved through the universe. He lost consciousness of the physical plane. He went into black holes. He saw the birth of stars. And he came back and he realized that Freudian psychotherapy might be interesting, but I am really frustrated with the slow pace and the poor results. And this is the royal road to the unconscious. And he devoted his career to developing psychedelics, and his opus, his book, The Way of the Psychonaut, which was published by MAPS in 2019, is an incredible compendium of his life's work. But what happened in that session is he had the insights to begin to develop psychedelic psychotherapy. And working at the Prague Mental Hospital with people who had been institutionalized, some of them 12 years, neurotics, psychotics, he developed a protocol, much of which we still use today. Pre and post-session therapy, sitters working with the client, with the patient, eye shades, and evocative music, in his case, classical music, to move the session along. And what he found was very interesting, because what he found, and they were using high doses of LSD, was it might have been in the first session, it might have been in the 10th session, or it might have been in the 20th session. But eventually, the patient experienced ego death. And once they experienced this ego death experience, their symptoms improved, as observed by 3 other objective psychiatrists who are watching this whole process. So Grof laid the entire foundations for this. Albert Hofmann, when he saw how the genie of psychedelics came out of the bottle, said, look, psychedelics, LSD, that's my problem child. Grof later described it as a child prodigy born into a dysfunctional family. And I would like to add that the psychedelic renaissance has provided very effective family therapy for bringing psychedelics into the cultural mainstream. Grof now believes, out of leading 4,500 LSD trips, more than any person living or whoever existed, that consciousness is something that pervades the entire universe, that there's a cosmic intelligence that provides the entire, that permeates the entire universe, and that psychedelics activate the inner self-healing intelligence of the person, which helps move them to wholeness. And that's why he calls his work the Holotropic Mind. So this is a really important foundation, one of the key landmarks in the development of psychedelics and culture. I don't know if you have any comments or questions or insights about that first session of the course on psychedelics, past, present, and future.
Yeah, thanks. I always come back to what Stan said after his first LSD experience. Going in as an atheistic Freudian and coming out as a devotee of Shiva. After, as he explains it, like during that session, he started to leave his body. He left the room. Prague started to recede. The whole world started to recede. And then just seeing, felt like, just 1,000 exploding lights or suns, and just how radical that must have been for him to go in with that more atheistic medical viewpoint of things, scientific worldview, and then coming out is like, whoa, what is what is all this? And such a pioneer to really start to develop the foundation here.
And in the Holotropic Mind, he makes this observation of the irony did not escape him, that he had this cosmic conscious experience in a laboratory with a synthetic chemical in a communist country. And that's what catapulted him into that world. So that is no doubt about it, is one of the key landmarks. And I highly recommend The Way of the Psychonaut to anyone interested in the field. We move on to the second session of this course, second module, which is on María Sabina. It's a module on shamanism, psychedelics and shamanism, and world religions. And shamanism is the first religion. Mircea Eliade defined it as archaic techniques of ecstasy. Ecstasy from the Greek root word ecstasis, the movement of the soul. So ancient techniques for the flight of the soul. And one of the common elements in shamanism worldwide, which was a decentralized religion of our hunting and gathering ancestors, was there's sort of Middle Earth, there's the upper world where the gods and goddesses and the powers reside, there's the underworld where the ancestors reside, and the role of the shaman is to travel to those worlds to bring back a boon to society, to heal, for a good hunt, the rains, protection of the community, finding lost souls that are wandering in the netherworlds. María Sabina, the Mazatec wise woman and shamanist, is probably thanks to Gordon Wasson, the world's most famous shaman. In 1953, amateur mycologist and J.P. Morgan banker Gordon Wasson traveled down to Huautla de Jimenez in the highlands of Oaxaca, where the Mazatec people lived and have lived for centuries, and practiced a ritual using psychoactive mushrooms. María Sabina grew up in a lineage of shamans, and she knew about them. She had ingested a few of them as a young person, and her sister became deathly ill. And María Sabina decided to take a large amount, like 15 double caps, a total of 30 caps of landslide mushrooms, which is the variety that grew there. And she had an illuminating vision that anointed her as a Mazatec shaman. She heard a voice, a lovingly fatherly voice that said, "These are the principal ones." And a book appeared on the table before her. And even though she was illiterate in both Mazatec and Spanish, the book grew and she could read it. And she could read it, she couldn't touch it. And she realized that this was the book of language and that she had attained the wisdom she needed, not to heal herself, but to allow the mushrooms to heal through her. And that's why in her chants, and one of the things that Gordon Wasson did accomplish was he recorded her shamanic sessions and put them out on a Folkways CD, along with liner notes of her chants in English, Spanish, and Mazatec side by side. And it's interesting to just hear just a snippet of one of her chants. "I am a spirit woman," says. "I am a woman of light," says. "I am a woman of day," says. "I am a clean woman," says. "I am Lord Eagle Woman," says. Our Jesus Christ says. So what you have here are two really important things. The syncretism of 300 years of Catholic Spanish colonialism overlaid on the ancient Mazatec mushroom tradition, probably handed down through the Aztecs and their predecessors as well. The word "says" at the end of every chant means that it is the mushroom speaking, mushroom says, that is speaking through her. So María Sabina was not a sorcerer who heals through spells, nor a curer who heals through herbs, but she was a wise woman who took the mushrooms and allowed them to heal through her. And once she healed her sister, who was deathly ill, people came to seek her counsel and to participate in these ceremonies. Wasson did a magnificent job of recording her ceremonies, but she also allowed him and his celebrity photographer who came with him to take photographs. But she said, "Look, this is a secret ceremony. This is only in private. These are for you only. And these photographs are for you and your friends, because if you put them out further, it would be una traición. It would be a betrayal." And Wasson in 1957 did just that. He published the photographs in Life magazine, which was one of the most widely read photographic magazines in the world at that time. And in a way, he inadvertently started the psychedelic revolution, because beatniks, fellow travelers, religious seekers, celebrities like John Lennon and Mick Jagger came down in search of God through the magic mushroom. And it had a devastating impact on María Sabina and the Mazatec community, sort of a precursor of what we're seeing today, the kind of burden on indigenous communities and on the ecosystems that grow ayahuasca, that grow peyote, etc., because these are becoming overburdened. And this is one of the challenges that the psychedelic renaissance faces. So this is the second module of our course. It looks at shamanism and world religions, and we also go deeply into Julie and my work about the psychedelic mushroom images we documented throughout churches and cathedrals in early and medieval Christianity.
Yeah, I just think this, like, exploring the life of Maria Sabina is so important. I always come back to something that was published on chacruna.net, talking about ultimately how Maria Sabina grew up in poverty and died in poverty. And as this field really progresses, and we're talking about patenting, synthetic psilocybin, and just thinking about really the indigenous roots here, and what does reciprocity look like at times, and just moving forward and really thinking, like, if it wasn't for Maria Sabina letting Gordon Watson and Valentina and the photographer to come in for the ceremonies, where would we be? Right? Like, would we
Yeah.
have this knowledge? I mean, I'm sure eventually we'd probably have stumbled across it, but I mean, she really, really, kind of kickstarted a lot of this stuff. So really needing to pay respect to her and her work and her life.
No doubt about it, because there's a difference between standing on the shoulders of giants and crushing the people who've gone before us.
Yeah.
And it's not only Maria Sabina. I mean, as an anthropologist, I know that anthropologists have studied shamanism. It's been one of the fundamentals, rites of passage, rites of shamanism. And we talk about the Huichol peyote hunt. We talk about ibogaine among the Fang people of Gabon in Africa. We talk about Amanita muscaria use, which is ongoing today among the 300,000 Siberian reindeer herders who are called the fathers of shamanism. So this is a worldwide phenomena. There are some vestiges of it remaining today, but we certainly have a deep obligation to the past, because without their exploration, I mean, how did the early chemists ever put the two plants together that make the ingestion and oral activity of ayahuasca possible? About the adventuresome people, I mean, peyote, if you've ever tasted it, is extremely bitter. Those explorations that took them to explore that. So this is an excellent point that you're making, and Chacruna is really excellent at calling this to Chacruna Institute to people's attention. In Module 3 of the course, we look at psychedelics for passion and purpose. And this is a very interesting topic. It's like, if you look at the Facebook pages today, I mean, and they keep proliferating. People are asking, how do I do psychedelics? And what are the challenges that come up? And it's interesting that near the end of Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, he interviews Roland Griffiths, the grandfather of the psychedelic renaissance. And he asks Griffiths, a kind of a loaded question. What about psychedelics for healthy people? And Griffiths, who is poignantly aware of the political minefields that exist and have to be navigated for the medical legalization and approval of psychedelics, says, well, they're too important to just be for people with mental problems. And then he changes that to say they will be, kind of kicking the can down into the future. But I would like to suggest, and I don't think it's any great leap of the imagination, that psychedelics have been very valuable to the 30,000 Americans who've tried LSD and other psychedelics explorations that have gone on in the psychedelic underground. And since the psychedelic revolution of the 1950s and the 1960s, they have been used for scientific creativity, as James Fadiman has documented. They've been used for spiritual growth. And in one of the personal experiences that Julie and I describe in this module, not because there are experiences, but because they're sort of illustrations of the answers to the kind of questions that people ask. How important is set and setting? In my particular case, I had a life-transforming experience with psilocybin in Jamaica. It was on spring break from the university. I was at a time in my life where I fasted twice a year for detoxification and sort of clarity. And I was walking down this beach in Jamaica, and this was in Negril, Jamaica, before it got all built, 1979, before it was all built up with hotels. And this Rasta comes walking towards me with eyes ablaze, dreadlocks flying. We're walking along the edge of this gorgeous beach, turquoise waters. And I say, hi, who are you? He says, oh, I'm the mushroom man from the Blue Hills of Jamaica. And he hands out this bag, and he has a bunch of mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms in it. And I took one and I scratched it, and it turned blue And as we know, psilocybin and psilocin turn blue when they're oxidized. And I said, how much? And he held up his hand, $5. I gave him $5. And I took the bag home to this little cabin on the beach that I had rented from another guy from Florida who was down there. We made up a mushroom tea, and I pulled on my bathing suit and I headed out to the beach. And my friend threw me an orange as I went out the door. And as I was going along, I threw the orange up in the air, and it came down and I caught it. And then I noticed that it was taking longer and longer to go up and come down. And then I noticed this pinkish cloud descending near the earth, and these 3 miniature elfin-like figures were descending like it, a kind of a cloud ladder. And they were talking in a musical language, and for some reason, I could understand them. And they said, come with us. And I contemplated that, but I became afraid. I thought, if I go with them, would I ever get back? I wasn't so sure. And then the voice said, today I'm going to take you to play in the Temple of the Sun. And it was just magnificent. I mean, being in the water, lifting off on this very mellow and powerful psilocybin experience. And then the voice said, and I can only experience this as a divine voice, today I'm going to show you your death. And I went through that realization. Ooh. And then I came to a deserted part of the beach. No one was around. I went into the water. I communed. I became a dolphin. I mean, I just communed with Mother Ocean for what were hours. And then I came back on the shore and I sat on a dune and I was looking out over the horizon. And suddenly I got an ominous feeling. And this cloud on the horizon turned into this metallic form, and it started growing, almost filling the horizon by quantum leaps. And the voice said again, that is atomic energy. It is evil. You must destroy it. And that's the last I ever heard of the voice. I went back. I crashed the entire next day. The following morning, and this is April 1979. I flew back to Miami. I walk out of customs. I see the Miami Herald, big, bold headlines, 3 Mile Island, 30 minutes from a meltdown. Well, I was completely blown away by this Jungian synchronicity, this meaningful coincidence of a mental psychedelic experience and something physical that happened in the world. How could they possibly be connected? But they were obviously connected. And for the next, and this is the way I found what James Hillman, the psychologist, called my soul's code. For the next 40 years and still today, I've been involved in working on anti-nuclear and renewable energy issues. And I found a passionate purpose through psychedelics. So what we do, Julie and I, in this session, and my wife, Julie, who's a psychotherapist, she's an integrative psychotherapist. She works with psychosynthesis. She works with guided imagery. She's worked with cancer patients and women's issues in her private practice that she had in Miami for 30 years. And we describe personal experiences that relate to passion and purpose, because it's not just all about spiritual awareness. There are many benefits. And I would say today, I'm the person that I became because of psychedelics. They've incredibly enriched my life. And unfortunately, back in those days, we didn't know anything about 60s. We didn't know much, at least, about dose. We didn't know much about setting. We didn't know much about, psychological, what you brought to it. Forget integration circles, integration related to civil rights, not to psychedelics. So, we went through some harrowing experiences, and people still do today who are not prepared, but there are so many tools today. But we wanted to say in this session that there are many, many benefits that can be explored through psychedelics. And you have Psychedelics Today has this phenomenal navigating psychedelics course to prepare people for that. Do you just, how is that going, by the way?
Oh, it's a wonderful course. I love it. Yeah, and just helping to prepare people to really understand, the power of these substances, and really kind of approach it with respect. But yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing that really, really powerful story. I mean, that's really fascinating. And I think this topic of like purpose and passion in psychedelics, sometimes I feel my opinion here. It kind of gets mixed up with like some of the woo woo or kind of like business, entrepreneurial aspects of the culture. And it's almost like, devalued in a sense. But I think there's an important purpose there. And I love that you bring up James Hillman. I'm a huge fan of Hillman. And just talking about, our soul's purpose, he always comes back to psyche. And I know he talks about the acorn theory in that book. But, this life force that kind of comes out of us and wants to express itself. It wants to do something. And I think that's really important. And not just psychedelics can really emphasize that. I mean, that's been definitely a core of my my work to some degree after a near-death experience. I mean, any sort of brush with death, I think, really makes you question, what's your purpose here? What are you doing here? How do you want to spend your time here on Earth? And I just love that you shared that story and got that really powerful download and insight, and started to move towards that. That's so huge.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it. And I think, that magic and that resacralization of life's experience that, people talk about, this is a real deal. I mean, if you think about it, many of the founders of the field had transformational psychedelic experiences that took them from where they were in one part of their life and brought them into working on psychedelics. Timothy Leary in Cuernavaca, who said he learned more in 5 or 6 hours on psilocybin mushrooms than in 15 years of studying psychology. Michael Harner, who in his ayahuasca near-death experience saw the Egyptian-like ships coming towards him with the bird-headed people on the deck. And he realized that he was dying and they were coming to take his soul away. And he somehow managed to say the word for the antidote, and the Conibo shaman gave him the antidote. And he left his prestigious teaching position at the New School of Social Research in New York to create the foundation for the study of shamanism. And you can go on and on and on. Wow. And if we think about happiness, it's really two pillars. One is love. Love yourself, love others, hopefully have a good, loving relationships with friends and family. And work. If you have work that you love and love yourself and have loving relationships, those are the foundations of a happy life, no matter what's going on in this crazy world around us. And there's plenty of that craziness going on. So purpose and revealing the soul's code is one of the wonderful things that come out of this. And I think these stories, not only Julie and mine, but everybody's story is important. We're all like leaves on this vast cosmic tree whose roots go back, into ancient times. So other aspects of the present are, of course, 2006, the beginning of the psychedelic renaissance at Johns Hopkins Medical School under the tutelage of Roland Griffiths, who was eminently qualified to bring this about. Now, remember, we've just come out of several decades of the Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan war on drugs and the 1970s Controlled Substances Act, which banned most known psychedelics and talked about controlled the manufacture, the distribution, and the use. Just as a footnote here, and I'm not going to get into this in depth, but one of Nixon's chief aides from the Watergate years, John Ehrlichman, confessed shortly before his death that, look, you want to know what this drug war was really about? Well, we had a political problem in the Nixon White House. We had a civil rights movement and we had an anti-war movement. And we couldn't make it illegal to protest, and we certainly couldn't make it illegal to be Black. But by criminalizing this and associating these people now with drug dealers and blasting them on the news every night and raiding their homes and going into their communities and demonizing them, we hoped to cripple these movements. So this has led to many, many people being arrested for victimless crimes. And hopefully we're seeing now with decriminalization that some of these felony records are being erased. But back to Roland Griffiths. He had, when he started researching psychedelics, which came out of his interest in meditation, he had over 300 peer-reviewed papers on drugs and drug addiction. So he had impeccable credentials in the field. And he decided to pick up where Walter Pahnke had started in 1962 with the miracle of Marsh Chapel, showing in a double-blind experiment that psychedelics could cause an authentic mystical experience. 25 years later, Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, did a follow-up study, and he found that 7 of the 9 Protestant divinity students in Walter Pahnke's study still said that their psychedelic experience of 25 years ago was one of the most significant experiences in their life and still had lasting benefits, and concluded there is no real difference between a psychedelic religious experience and an authentic non-psychedelic religious experience. And that was a big debate issue at the particular time. So in 2000, in a series of papers in 2006 and 2008, Roland Griffiths and the associate director, Matt Johnson, demonstrated that it was safe to take psychedelics in a clinical setting, that they could have positive results. They led to spiritual experiences. They led to mood improvements, and they had long-lasting benefits at that time out to about 14 months. And then they did their famous psilocybin cancer research, a double-blind study in 2016 with about 53 advanced stage cancer patients. Some received high-dose psilocybin, about 22 to 30 milligrams per 70 kilograms of body weight, and then 1 or 2 milligrams on the low dose, on the control dose. 70% of them had reductions, and these are people with advanced stage cancer, and anxiety, depression, and fear of death. And Griffiths concluded high-dose psilocybin produced large decreases in clinician and self-rated measures of depressed mood and anxiety, along with increases in the quality of life, life meaning, and optimism, and decreases in death anxiety. And Griffiths said, look, when you have 70% of a research population achieving this kind of result in 1 or 2 sessions, in some cases where a person who is so battered down by cancer elevates themselves and is giving comfort to their family and caretakers, even we researchers have to step back in awe. And one of the most fascinating findings out of this study, and something Julie and I have written about in papers on psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and mystical experience, is the following statement, both by Johns Hopkins and by NYU, who also did psilocybin cancer trials. In both trials, the intensity of the mystical experience described by patients correlated to the degree to which their depression and anxiety decreased. I mean, let's just think about what this means. We have white-coated shamans in a clinical laboratory administering a synthetic psychedelic to predictably occasion a mystical experience, which turns out to be the key to healing. I mean, this is amazing and brings psychedelics back to its shamanic roots. And what Johns Hopkins did was they took Walter Pahnke's early 1962 Miracle of Marsh Chapel questionnaire that they gave to the participants in that study to help evaluate, did you have all of the components of a mystical experience? And they refined, vetted it into a 30-question mystical experience questionnaire, the MEQ 30. So this is the way we can tell today if people are having an authentic mystical experience, and there are 5 major components of it. And this is really important for psychedelic therapists to understand, where are the people traveling in their journeys. And we talk about in the session, what are those components? Unity, sense of oneness, authentic inner guidance and voice beyond time and space, and ineffable in the sense that it's very difficult to explain to to put into words, so to speak. So this is where our work on the psychedelic renaissance comes in.
Wonderful, wonderful. I don't have too many comments. I think let's move on to the next topic.
So now we move into two modules that we have on the future of psychedelics. One of these relates to the decriminalization and legalization movements. And Kyle, one of the things we've seen with cannabis, which now we have the majority of states have either approved cannabis for medical use or approved cannabis for medical and recreational use. We've seen with cannabis that legalization follows medicalization. When people see that cannabis can help someone, a child who's had horrible convulsions and spasms, when it can give you relief from cancer medication, when it can give you relief from chronic pain, even conservatives, and it was interesting to me that in Arizona, where the legalization of cannabis took place, way back in the early days, arch conservatives like Barry Goldwater supported this. Why? Because conservatives did not want the federal government standing between a physician and a patient. So when people saw these medical benefits, we started to see legalization following medicalization. The same kind of thing is happening with the decriminalization and the legalization movements. And what we saw was Denver as the first community to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms. And this was followed up by Oakland, Santa Cruz, Ann Arbor, Washington, D.C., and it's moving on the ballot. And it's going to be on the statewide ballot eventually in California and in other states. And as opposed to complete legalization, decriminalization means that it becomes the lowest law enforcement priority. They're not going to put funds into it. They're going to put together a supervisory board to monitor the program. And you could look back in the model of what happened in Portugal back in 2001, when Portugal had serious drug problems, especially among the people coming back from colonial wars. And they said, you know what? We're not buying this war on drugs story. We see this as a medical problem, not as a criminal problem. Portugal decriminalized all drugs, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, psychedelics. And 20 years later, drug use actually went down. Drug overdose deaths have declined. Drug-related illnesses have declined, and it's been a huge success story. And we're seeing that story start to be followed in the United States. Another very significant landmark that took place in terms of this decriminalization and legalization is the 2020 Oregon Psilocybin Services Initiative. And this allows the manufacture, the delivery, and administration of psilocybin in licensed settings by licensed professionals. And so we're seeing the first establishment in the country of what could become a model of psychedelic therapy centers. Rick Doblin, founder of MAPS, observed, look, it took us 30 years to get towards approval. And MAPS is looking to approval of MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder by 2023, FDA approval. And now he foresees hundreds of psychedelic therapy sessions coming into being over the next 5 years. So this is definitely a breakthrough moment and a growing field. And the legislation puts a 2-year period for really implementing and evaluating the program. And other states certainly have their eyes on this. Another avenue of legalization that probably a lot of people may not be aware of is through the legalization for religious purposes. And this is taking place in limited circumstances under the 1993 Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which allows communities that have a deep religious tradition of the use of psychedelics to legally use them. And this has been affirmed by the Supreme Court. So we have the 300,000 Native Americans in the Native American Church who legally use peyotes in their ceremony. And we have the growing US branches of the Brazilian Santo Daime and União de Vegetal, UDV churches, which use psychedelics. And these have been approved also by the Brazilian Council of Bishops, which indicates that Christianity and psychedelics can certainly coexist. This is not without its challenges, because the commercialization of psychedelics that's taking place, what some people have called the mush rush, sort of what happened in the .com, is we're seeing publicly funded corporations come into the field. And look, it costs millions of dollars to go through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of clinical testing to get formal FDA approval to legally use psychedelics. But what's gone to a particular concern is that some companies like Compass Pathways, which is one of the major psychedelic companies out there that's raised vast amounts of money, have actually put in patent applications to control and claim proprietary ownership of even psychedelics, delivery techniques, things that have been around for a long time, a softly lighted room, how the therapist can touch the patient. And this has, as you can imagine, has caused deep concern and open, overt discussions and public conflicts between sort of the visionary, utopian, democratic psychedelic community that believes in the statement put forward by the Council on Spiritual Practices, the statement for open science and open praxis, versus the corporate approach that is arguing to their investors that our way will be the way because we will be able to block other ways. And therapists, if our patents are approved, and most people don't think they will be approved, because in a patent you have to show a novel invention, and these are certainly not novel inventions, that the nightmare scenario comes up where if I want to sit with someone in a legal psychedelic therapy session, I'm going to have to get a license from Compass Pathways in order to do that. This is an ongoing discussion, and it's inspired the brilliant Jamie Wheel, who wrote the book Stealing Fire, to say that, look, the founders of this field are sort of playing, looking for Woodstock, a scientific Woodstock. And they don't realize that the real game that's being played is Monopoly. Or if you looked at it in chess, you're about to get checkmated. So this is one of the most fundamental conflicts that exist in the field today. And how this is all resolved will determine, to a large part, the shape and the format and the nature of who are psychedelic therapists going to be working for in the future. Will it be sort of the public benefit model that puts people over profits that MAPS is pursuing, or will it be a more restrictive corporate model? I don't know if you have any insights or comments or further questions on that before I go on to the last module here.
Those are big and important questions. And, for those that have been listening and following us here at Psychedelics Today, these are things that we've been exploring on, most of our Solidarity Friday episodes. So, it's so interesting to see how things develop over the years, and really how quickly things have developed over the past few years. Just even thinking about when I started to get really interested in this topic, it didn't even feel like a career path. And things just feel like they have accelerated tenfold within the past, year, 2 years, 5 years or so. So it's been interesting to follow it. A lot of these more complex questions come up around patent use and licensing and et cetera. So.
Yeah, and there are tremendous challenges. With some 300,000 people in the world suffering from serious depression, and 1 out of 5 Americans dealing with some kind of mental illness. How do you if this is the breakthrough therapies, and the FDA has designated them as breakthrough therapies, meaning we don't have anything that's really effective. And this is better than anything that's been around for decades. So yes, we want to help vets with post-traumatic stress disorder. But how do you bring this to scale? how do you really bring this to scale
Yeah, a
and
lot of
have the
capital.
economic power to do it? And how do you do it by keeping the authenticity of the psychedelic experience, or not ending up with some kind of, dialing an 800 number, scheduling your online telemedicine psychedelic experience, which will be guided by, someone who's been trained in a
AI.
corporate environment, and you end up with Prozac Nation 2.0. All right. So the last thing I'd like to talk about in the last module, which I think is very exciting for my students, and not only for psychedelic therapists, but for a whole range of people, are, as you've said, you're amazed, I'm amazed how fast this has taken off. And if you look at this whole hockey stick phenomena, you see this in global warming, when things just seem to hit an inflection point. Like as has happened with microdosing, as Jim Fadiman describes, where things just curve up and accelerate and build on each other. There are tremendous, authentic career opportunities, both as major careers and as specializations, for people looking to build a future in psychedelics. And it's interesting, for people like me who started out early in this field, there was no funding, there was ostracism. When I first talked to my union representative about teaching, I said, well, can I talk about my experiences? He says, this was illegal. The psychedelics were illegal. He said, not if you want to keep your job. Well, I guess can I have students talk about their experiences? Not if you want to get tenure. And I said, well, I guess that eliminates field trips altogether. So we've come a long way where certain people now in the field, like Robin Carhart Harris, certainly Stanislav Grof, Jim Fadiman, they're like rock stars. And with their opinions being sought after. It's a complete transformation. So what are some of the emerging careers? Well, certainly clinical research, neuroscience, and pharmacology. There's a great interest in designing more effective and different forms of psychedelic drugs. There's a whole field for therapy guides and integration coaches, and also microdosing coaches, and microdosing, which is effective at very small doses, may be, the real dark horse in the psychedelic field in terms of dealing with depression long-term with minor dosage. There's nonprofit education. There's a lot of organizations, including your organization, Psychedelics Today, and many, many other nonprofits, Chacruna Institute, Lucid News, who are educating people. The many people now who are aware that something important is happening with psychedelics. Political activism, people who have political organization skills, who are moving these campaigns to decriminalize nature, both in the United States, Europe, Latin America, etc. News media and communications, getting authentic and valid information out about psychedelics. Certainly for entrepreneurs, there are vast opportunities. You can find a list of 27 public companies that are looking to employ people for their future use. One of them, field trips, for example, is building a network of clinics, of psychedelic clinics. And just contemplate this point for a minute. For people who've labored in this field as nonprofits or as ignored researchers for so long, and a corporation can come along and they can offer you stock options. And they can say, you work with us, you'll get, your salary, et cetera, but you'll also get, 50,000 options a year. And if our company gets public for 5 years, you have those options. You have 250,000 options, maybe at $1, and they go to $10. I mean, this is bringing capitalism and greed. And I'm not saying that greed is bad, but I'm saying it's dangerous in the field of psychedelics into the field in a way that's never been here before. And the financial incentives are phenomenal and very powerful. And then, of course, there's the whole future establishment of psychedelic centers. And I don't know at what point, it's interesting right now that leading the pathway of psychedelics into spiritual experience are the clinical researchers and the underground therapists. And at some point, are the mainline religious institutions going to allow their flocks to go off in another direction? Or are they going to say, we can reintegrate psychedelics back into religious experience and create a kind of modern eleusis offering psychedelic retreat center for healthy people in beautiful settings with the availability of guides. So those are the main 6 modules. And in wrapping this up, I'd like to just make a few observations as to why these are important, why this kind of history, past, present, and future, is important for clinicians and therapists. In the first place, psychedelic sacred plants have been used by our ancestors for thousands of years, giving rise to shamanism, humanity's first religion, and shamans, the first psychotherapists. So there's a long tradition to build on. Secondly, the whole history of psychedelics and their periodic suppression from time to time with the coming of monotheism, with the Inquisition and the suppression of the wise women witches of the Middle Ages, and certainly during the unprecedented blackout on research that came upon us in the modern United States from the 1970s on to the early 2000s with the Nixon's war on drugs. There's a chain of being that keeps springing to life again and again, this time in the form of the psychedelic renaissance. Why? Because there is a fundamental Gandhian satyagraha. There's a truth force here, that anyone who gets near to these substances recognize their potential benefits to both individuals, to societies, and perhaps to humanity as a whole. Number 3, it's very important to develop a working knowledge of the history and evolution of psychedelic psychotherapy, including the psycholytic models and the psychedelic models, and the implications for psychology and for psychiatrists, the implications for the role of the therapist, and the so important need for ethical protocols and agreements in the context of the meaning of people who are facilitating applied spirituality in these sessions. And this becomes dangerous because you have people from, the life coaching area and people who, go through one ayahuasca session and they set themselves up as a spiritual leader for psychedelic sessions. And this is another danger to the field of unqualified people, if you'll excuse the expression, phony holies, who are coming in and putting themselves up as psychedelic guides without proper credentials or training or experience. The last point is this background is also essential for understanding all of the issues that surround the eventual legalization of psychedelic psychotherapy, as has recently been approved in Oregon. The training programs, the monitoring, the evaluation, the pros and cons of intellectual property issues that are all going to define the shape that psychedelic psychotherapy will take in the United States and around the world. I'm tremendously excited about offering this course, and I look forward to being involved with any of you who are interested in it.
I'm super excited as well, and I guess a little bit of more context and information. So Jerry is offering a course for us at Psychedelics Today, and we're going to be hosting a live session. So this is going to be a hybrid course. Jerry with the pre-recorded material, going through a lot of these topics. And then we're going to meet online for 4 sessions for an hour and a half. And this is going to begin on October 26th. So the dates are on Tuesdays, October 26th, November 9th, November 23rd, and December 7th. And that is going to kick off at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time, and then also 7 p.m. Your time over there. You're in Spain, correct, Jerry?
In Europe.
Europe, yeah. So European time there. So you'll be able to learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And I'm really excited for this. I think it's, really important. Something that came up for me today, not in only our conversation, but Joe and I just recorded with Jeremy Narby. And I think this is important too, for, people that are in the sciences, and as the psychedelic renaissance is really starting to unfold here, this idea of different ways of knowing, and Jeremy kind of talking about, the indigenous perspective being valid just as much as a scientific worldview as well. This idea of talking about the spirits and the molecules, and, really the different languages here. And so as therapists, looking into the past, looking at shamanism, I think is really important, because how are we going to, contain these transpersonal phenomenon when it comes up in psychedelic sessions? This is something that Joe and I talk pretty frequently about on the show. Is psychiatry and psychology ready to deal with some of the transpersonal phenomenon that comes up in these psychedelic experiences? I think to some degree, not, because it's not really talked about in graduate education. I didn't get any of that in my graduate education. Luckily, I had my transpersonal degree to help really kind of form that foundation and a lot of different experience. But, there's a lot of, I think, validity to different ways of knowing. And so being able to go into the past to really have some sort of foundation there, to understand some context around these experiences. And yeah, the number one question we get: how do you get involved? Hey, I'm really interested in psychedelics. I really want to get involved, whether that is through psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy or taking a totally different approach. I mean, when I started off in this field, I thought it was just the clinical therapy route. But now there's hundreds of things exploding, right? I mean, we always talk about, man, we really need to find like psychedelic-friendly lawyers who are the graphic designers that have experience with, visual art and can help translate our messages. So there's so many different avenues to go down now. It's not just the clinical and therapy path. Just if you want to dive into this course, definitely check this out. Again, we're kicking it off. This is a live hybrid class. You'll get some pre-recorded material and then some live sessions, and that begins on October 26th. And you can check that out at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Jerry, I just love this conversation, love the outline that you presented here, some really important topics. Anything that you want to close with for today as we wrap this episode up?
Well, just one practical point. The course, I understand, also offers CEs, continuing education.
Yes, this is also CE. Yep, CE approved. So for those that are looking for some continuing ed, this will be continuing ed approved.
No, just that I think you hit the nail on the head. The field is authentic, it's grounded, it's founded in scientific research. We're seeing, to put it another way, of different ways of knowing what C.P. Snow, the philosopher, talked about, the worlds of religion and science, which he talked about as the two cultures always being separate. And they come back together in psychedelics. So, no doubt about it that there is a future, both for people who are personally interested, both of people, of lawyers or academics or artists who want to specialize in psychedelics, and people who want to build entire career futures in psychedelics. There are authentic opportunities today, and we're going to describe those throughout this course. Thank you very much, Kyle.
Dr. Jerry Brown, thank you. And thank you for everybody listening. We'll catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today. So take care and have a wonderful week.